So as educators, we've all had challenging days, and we've all had kids in our classroom that their behaviours might have challenged us as well. That's how we came up with a topic title of Challenging Kids and Challenging Kids. So let's get started. Andrew, before I jump into some questions, and so that I can have a moment to try to remove that background from you, I'm wondering if you can tell us one big idea that you've been grappling with at the moment in relation to behaviour and relationships within the classroom.
Kids are bonkers. Families are bonkers. The world's bonkers. Gee, I mean, wow, people have come back from this pandemic years just all over the place. I don't know. It just seems absolutely kind of crazy. And the more you kind of look at the world, you go, what the hell's going on here? So it really is a sort of situation where we don't want to join them. Goodness me. And in terms of the craziness of the world, I mean, you really want to be sitting apart from it, scratching your head and going, what the heck's going on? But you certainly don't want to be, I mean, people are just generally incredibly discombobulated. It's almost like the natural rhythms of a healthy life got thrown out of whack and they just haven't recovered them. And so they're busy, they're exhausted, they're kind of all agitated, they're over the place. And it's frankly a bit of a mess. So I don't want to get too gloomy about it, but at the same time, for your own well-being, you want to realize that it's probably a good thing to be out of kilter with the mainstream, not part of the mainstream.
You were talking about the post-COVID challenges of the classroom and lockdowns. And a lot of the things that I'm hearing from many teachers who are my friends are that they've found behaviours in the classroom and outside in the yard have been different coming back from lockdowns. The skills that students might have been learning before lockdowns, like cooperation and problem solving, conflict resolution and patience, obviously weren't necessarily the focus during lockdowns. And there's a heightened sense of anxiety between students and also teachers. And helping young people in the classroom, both individuals and in a group, can be challenging, especially when there's an inability to regulate emotions. I know you and I briefly spoke about top-down and bottom-down approaches, and I'm wondering if you can share with us some tips about how we can help young people regulate their emotions in the classroom and in turn make more positive behaviour choices.
So it's interesting to think about brain function and how it works. So we often really applaud the prefrontal cortex and all of that planning and stuff like that. But the vast bulk of your brain power isn't in the upper bit behind your forehead. It's actually in the lower dark depths of the brain. And where our much more emotional, fear, anxious responses are the things that really drive behavior. So while the sort of higher order or top-down thinking is really useful, the big changes aren't going to occur there. So if we think about top-down, really there are skills that we can help all students to use that are going to be much more effective. And they're essentially note making. So learning how to make notes, incredibly important skill, and these predict academic success. And handwritten notes are much more powerful than typed notes. In fact, the more skin you've got in the game, the more you're organizing information on a page, the better. Retrieval practice, so testing yourself. How much do I remember? Spaced repetition, spacing out. So our brains are really designed to drip feed information in. So the more we can kind of space out learning. So that's very clear research. Deliberate practice, not just practicing the stuff that we really feel good about, because we all want to do that because, oh my goodness me, I know that really well. But the things that are difficult. And then finally, it's about knowing your own learning strengths, because that builds self-efficacy. And self-efficacy is the predictor not only of good well-being, but also learning success. So we really want our students to know that what they do makes a difference. And that's might seem really obvious, but it's an important thing to point out to kids or have them experience, because there does seem to be in the world this kind of feeling of a bit of helplessness or powerlessness, as if what they do doesn't change things, and that's clearly not true. So that's the top down part of that question, and they're the core skills. And so what's interesting in terms of top-down processing, it really is skills and practices that help kids to really succeed. And we want parents then to back that up by really having kids, and I wrote a paper on this, where we want kids to basically show up as ready to learn. And it means sort of breakfasted, well slept, all that kind of stuff. Opting in rather than avoiding out, and being interested. I think it's really important to basically think about ways to do that.
Yeah. I'm wondering off the back of that, do you have a favorite way to increase interest in the classroom, perhaps for students who are disengaged, or just for creating more motivation to participate?
So now we go into the depths of the bottom-up part of the brain. That's really what's controlling that bit. And so that's the neurochemistry of human behavior, which is a fascinating area. And this is a really exciting area, because it means that educators and parents can regulate kids' behavior without having to convince them. So when we look at top down, that's mindsets and attitudes and habits of learning and predispositions, and I want to learn this. But the lower part basically is not really driven by language at all. It's driven by activities. And so what we think about is a range really from attack to, and I'll talk about what I mean by that. And then it's basically about avoid, and then it's about agitate, and then it's about activate, and then it's approach, and it's attach. So let's go through each of those briefly. When I talk about attack, I'm not necessarily talking about aggression, but it can be a kind of cranky kind of argumentativeness, of course, but it can also be attack against themselves. I'm no good, I'm dumb, all that kind of stuff. And that of course can accentuate more seriously than that as well, sadly. And that's largely driven by cortisol. And so there's a lot in classrooms that we can do and in families to really reduce that and to make people calm. But interestingly, cortisol, which is, of course, the really driver of anxiety, is not terribly controlled by just talking about it. People have to do things differently. So often when we have a buildup of our corticosteroids, our stress hormones, we have to physically shake it off. This looks weird in the background, but really get rid of things that basically are agitating us. And so running out, singing it out, grabbing a guitar, playing it out, all that kind of stuff. Avoidance is really often more driven by adrenaline, which is basically adrenaline is a kind of wary, this is going to be disastrous for me, so I'm not going to have a go. It's better not to attempt this because it's too scary. And so having routines and rituals in place in a classroom that make it a safe place to be, obviously good relationships as well, but also having a sense that this is the way we do things here, because certainty is something that evaporated through the COVID years. And now to be more certain. So it's a very interesting kind of mix for an educator, because it's basically having some routine predictableness in your classroom, and then within that having moments when you need to become more spontaneous. So it's almost like they've got to have a bit of both in order, and you need to then control that as a human being. Okay, we've got this we know this is roughly the map of the day, and now we're going to shift and basically do something a bit weird and wacko, and that's also important to do from time to time. Approach is motivation, and that's driven by dopamine. And dopamine, of course, is the hormone that really drives all of that. And that's about desire and having a go and successes and acknowledgement and feedback. approaches about serotonin, the most powerful antidepressant known to humankind. And then so if we think about this little continuum right across, and the final part sort of attach. Now, attachment's a really interesting issue because about 45% of kids, and this is pre-COVID type data, have poor attachments. So that means that 45% of the students that we teach, at least, it's probably more now, I suspect, neither really trust adults, nor do they trust themselves.
Mm.
And so these are kids that have grown up in families or in circumstances where they're just wary, they're kind of edgy about things. Some of them are anxiously over kind of seeking reassurance. Others are ferociously avoidant of any input on, got any questions? No, I don't have any questions, Emma. I'm fine all the time. And this converts. You see these sorts of people later in life when you say to them, do you think we should stop and ask for directions? No. Do you think you should see a doctor about that? No, I'm fine. So you gotta, so self-reliance
Yep.
looks strong and good until it's not, and then it's really not. But thinking about, we can't fix the upbringings of every child in our care. We wish we could. That's not our job. Our job's big enough as it is. But we can then at school and classrooms make it a chance to really have kids attached at school and to really have a strong sense of belonging at school is a wonderful thing. And so it can really change the trajectory of a child's life. And that can be belonging to you as an educator, being your kind-hearted, generous-spirited person who believes in these kids and how wonderful they can truly be, and being upbeat and exuberant on their behalf. But it's also to the group. So I think one of the great tragedies of Australian education, and probably education across the world, is we've focused a lot on the ranking of kids. And so we almost implement hierarchies when we don't need to. And that's quite destructive, really, for their well-being, but also their adventurousness in learning. And so thinking about having a class of kids who they're all great, they're all fantastic, but you're all smart in different ways, makes an incredible difference. And this is powerful at any stage of schooling, but nowhere is it more powerful than years 3 and 4.
As a year 3 and 4 teacher of 8 years, I didn't know that. I do hope that I did a good job in those years, but I certainly noticed the difference in students between the time when they entered the classroom in grade 3, especially their fear and reluctance. They often had a little bit more guidance given to them in the early years. And once they got to grade 3 and 4 and they were learning independence and making up their own minds and decisions, I definitely noticed that there were periods where they were uncertain with themselves and they sought you out, but also periods where they just go off and give things a test when they felt really confident. And I did not know that 3 and 4 was the prime year for that, but now you've given me pause for reflection this afternoon. This kind of leads me to a question that I had written down for later on, but this was one that I faced in my own classroom, again, grade 3 and 4, of students feeling like education wasn't for them, and they might watch the activities that their peers are doing or compare themselves to their peers and feel discouraged and disheartened, and then start to disconnect from their own learning. Do you have any suggestions for how we can support these students to get some confidence in themselves and in their learning, and to really be excited by the learning they're doing in their classroom without comparing themselves to their peers?
Well, firstly, we know, I don't want to focus too much on year 3 and 4, but we know there's the year 3 phenomenon, that there are vast numbers of kids who decide that education is not for them and give up and never return. That's it. The game's over by year 3. And so kids, of course, at this stage are looking outside the family. Where do I fit in? Am I smart? Am I cool? Am I a nerd? What am I? And they're all trying to work out who to hang out with, who's my special best friend and who can't I stand. And a very wise year 3 or 4 teacher runs her class like a gang, really. You're a gang leader. And basically you're all great and you're all going to be great in different ways. And this is how we go about it. And so because kids are, and let's come back to our attachment stuff of 45%. So these kids are wary. They're not going to believe just what you say to them, right? So, and they don't really feel great about themselves either. And sometimes they've come from families that have, you know, degraded them really, or demeaned them a bit. And so the thing, I guess, is that we can't convince them or persuade them. But what we can do as adults is say, I believe in you.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I don't know whether you yet believe in you. And in some ways, I don't really mind. That's up to you. But I'm not giving up. And so you're smarter than you know.
Mm.
In fact, you're much smarter than you know. And even though you may not know it yet, I know it. And last time I looked, I'm the expert in the room and you're the kid. So now why I say it so forcefully like that is one of the things that I know from my other area of life, which is hypnosis, is that at this age, actually it fits with something else. Sorry, I'll come back to the hypnosis. Jean Piaget. Jean Piaget talked about this as concrete operations, which is a lousy term for it. But basically what it means is that kids can take on really complex stuff as long as they've got an adult who shows them how to do things. And so that makes an incredible difference. Now, so if we've got, and then if I go back to the hypnosis stuff, what we know is kids around this age are more suggestible hypnotically than any other age of life. Now, what that means, not that you're all going to become budding hypnotists, but essentially that kids believe what you tell them. And so if you tell them they're great, guess what? They're going to believe you, right?
Yeah.
But if adults say, you're a bit lousy, or something like that, not that you ever would, they believe that too. So we've got to be very, very careful about the strength of the messages that we give and the degree of exuberance that we have on kids' behalf. And they might look at you like you're a lunatic, but then, well, I've had kids look at me like I'm a lunatic for years. I'm used to it. In fact, I think that's quite productive when they think that. Makes an incredible difference.
I often preferred when my class thought that I was a little bit offbeat because it allowed them to feel like they could be their own version of offbeat as well. I am going to just pause for 1 second just to let people know. I can see you're all using the Q&A. I'm really sorry that the chat is disabled. I do recognize that that's a problem. And for our next webinar, we will get that fixed up. I'm also very sorry about the background behind Andrew. I have tried very hard. I cannot fix it, but please bear with us because I don't know about you, but I'm certainly taking a lot away from this that's making me feel both really thoughtful, but also really reflect on my own career as a teacher and perhaps the things that I did well. And I hope you're all reflecting on the things you're doing really well in your classroom as well. I'm going to switch gears just for a second to focus on teachers for a moment. This is a big question. Sometimes as adults, and I know we do this as educators, we walk in the classroom to put our best face on for our kids, and sometimes we're not feeling particularly good. We might be feeling dysregulated or disconnected. We might be having our own challenges in life, or we might just be feeling like teaching's a bit rough at that time. I know I've certainly been there, and I really feel that when I speak to my friends and other educators at the moment with cool.org. And I'm just wondering, do you have any tips that we could use as adults when we're feeling in a heightened state and perhaps there's a challenge in the classroom that we're facing so that we can approach situations perhaps feeling a little bit more settled, or even just approach taking time for ourselves to make sure that we're able to join the classroom feeling ready as well?
A couple of key thoughts. The first one is that teaching is a job that never gets done, right? So it's sort of endless, right? And so you never sort of tick everything off. Okay, it's all done. And that's important to realize, and got to I'll just tell you a quick funny story about this. I remember I was working at the Austin Hospital, and it was Friday at night, and I was complaining about not having got everything done. And a very wise secretary signaled and said, "Come over." And she said to me quietly, she whispered in my ear, she said, "God takes people when they're done." I thought, that's a useful lesson. So never get everything done. You always want to leave a bit left to do.
Right.
Um, Stay alive. Second thing is that basically the thing that makes teachers happiest is great relationships with kids, really. I mean, to have a happy career, you've got to have good relationships with the people you're going to spend most time with. Guess who that is? That's the kids. So when you're kind of flat as and feeling agitated, usually you're thinking about, I should have got all of this kind of stuff done and I haven't, and I'm a bad human being as a result of all that kind of stuff. And it's deflating. And look, there are demands that are a bit crazy in schools. We know that. But at the same time, if you go back to connecting with your kids and formulating a conversation with them, or who's got ideas about this or something like that, then the energy grows, I find. I mean, one of the wonderful things about hanging around with kids is that they keep you young. You know, they've got energy to burn, right? And they've got ideas that are just extraordinary.
Mm.
Um, and they come up with weird, wonderful stuff, you know. Um, I'll never forget having some activity that I dreamt up, and I thought this is going to be great. And the premise was basically, I think it was about year 5 students, I think. And the question was, which came first, the chicken or the egg, right? Anyway, so I thought this was going to be a good long exploration of this idea. And there was a kid who put his hands up and he said, well, the egg came first because dinosaurs were laying eggs a long time before chickens were on the scene. So that kind of stuffed that up. Anyway, but you got to admire. You
It's
know?
always those offbeat comments. I think that when I first started teaching, I felt really reluctant to put down all of my hard work, but then I realized that the most fun I could have in the classroom is following a tangent sometimes. I remember one maths class where I had students from grades 3 to 6, and I was asking them what they were going to do when they went back to start their work. And one student didn't know, and another student put their hand up and gave a response, and they asked, "How did you know that?" And she replied with, "I was thinking while Miss Young was talking." And the student in grade 6 asked, "Are you allowed to do that?" And by the time we got to grade 6, and this was a very bright, engaged boy, sometimes made some poor choices, but otherwise he was very engaged in his learning. But nobody had told him by 12 that he could be thinking while the teacher was talking. And for me, that was a real eye-opener of the fact that something I thought was a given wasn't, which did take us down a conversation of the fact that you can go back to your classroom and have thoughts going through your mind and figuring out what you're going to do while you're listening. And that is just one of my favorite anecdotes of things that I heard in the classroom that I didn't expect to hear.
Yeah, I mean, I get the privilege of working with some of the higher scoring students in year 12 in the state. And it's amazing because, you know, basically and some of them are quite miserable because, you know, they've been working really hard and life is tough for them. But one of the things I sometimes say is, you know, if you do the same thing that you did today, tomorrow, it's likely you're going to feel exactly the same way you did today, tomorrow. So if you do something different, in order to feel different, you're going to have to do something different. And they look at me like you've just kind of explained a mystery of the universe, right? Because these are smart kids, but they've just never thought about, oh, really? I might be on a treadmill, and if I keep doing the same damn thing, I'm going to feel the same damn way. Hallelujah.
It's amazing. I do have a list of questions here that I've collected, but I have some coming up in the Q&A that I thought are pretty interesting. So I might pop some of them out there. We've had a question of what experience or insights you can share of working with minority groups in the education system and improving positive engagement, such as those from refugee backgrounds, Indigenous students, LGBTQIA students. I'm wondering if you can provide us with any thoughts or strategies or tips that we could use in our classrooms and schools.
Sure. I mean, I suppose one of the things that I've learned over the years is to try to treat individuals as individuals pretty much. so that regardless of wherever they've come from or whatever orientation, I mean, to be respectful of those things, of course, but at the same time, once you sort of don't see people as members of groups, but see them as who they are and learn them for that, that becomes something that's ultimately deeply respectful of them. And so, I mean, this is true, yes, Indigenous, LGBTQ plus, all
Mhm.
that kind of stuff. But probably it's also very true of neurodiversity. And I think the thing about neurodiversity is that originally our ancestral tribes needed all of those diversities in order to survive. And I think it's important to realize that in all of human history, those neurodiversities have never been bred against sufficiently to die out, and
Mm.
which leaves you to kind of question, well, why not? Because they confer upon humanity an advantage. And so we are all different in different ways. And learning about that and appreciating that and kind of becoming a cheerleader for the differences as well as the commonalities in humanity, I think is a beautiful role. I mean, in some ways, we are creating a sort of a cradle, if you like, to nourish young spirits, aren't we? And those spirits will go in their own way. We kind of know that kids are a bit wonky and interesting, but at the same time, having that broad view of, well, my job's not to really tell you what you're going to be doing with your life.
Mm.
So who knows? That's an adventure for you, but I'm going to do the setup stuff that really gives you the confidence and the belief in yourself that's going to enable you to do that, whatever you choose.
Interesting. I think that some of my favorite like memories from education were definitely when I got to learn interesting things about my class, and just the feeling of camaraderie in your class when everybody knows everybody else and celebrates everybody else really makes a difference. I'm aware that we are approaching the end of the webinar, so I'm going to ask one more question from the chat, and then I'm going to ask the final one that I had on my list. I am aware that we're not going to get through all of the questions today. Please know that we have taken all of these down, and we're using this for food for thought for how we can create other PL and resources in the future. One question that we had in here, and I saw come through a lot from educators when they sent us through questions, was about attendance and school refusal. And I'm wondering, even beyond sort of the primary school age and into secondary, I know it's going to be different in every age, but are there any strategies that we could use as educators to help students reconnect to class, reconnect to each other, and connect to teachers that will want to make them come to school and also want to make them sort of participate in school life?
So there's sort of three major groups. There's the real kids who are school, I suppose, phobic, really. They're kids who've either been burned by school or feel that, there's no place for them there. And
Mm.
after prolonged periods at home, some of them post-COVID are like that. There's another group, probably smaller, who something nasty's happened, like being bullied or something like that, and they're trying to avoid particular kids. But the largest group are home addicted.
Mm.
And the reason they're home addicted is interesting. So that basically, and of course, this is something that I get to see in my family therapy work that possibly is harder to see when you're in a school. But when I sit down with the families, and usually the parents have tried everything, a kid to school, and it's really hard, and I understand exactly that. But one of the things that is obvious in many, many of those families is there's a fear by the child that somebody will die. Either they will die when they're at school, or their parent may die. And when I look at the broader family systems, there's usually been either a period of depression or ill health in someone.
Mhm.
And so in some ways, these kids are sacrificing their school attendance to basically care for whoever it is. It doesn't feel that way, and they're probably not aware of it. So it's not, if you said to a kid like this, you know, staying at home basically because you're worried about mum or dad or whatever it might be, they'll probably look at you like a bit crazy, but then that's usual. But it's useful to realize that, because in some ways then getting them to school is actually asking them to do something death-defying, right? This is pretty scary to do. So then we have to have strategies for having them be reassured that everyone's okay while I'm at school. So that means that's going to be a big step. So sometimes we'll have parents in the school at times to basically just be there for a period. I had a guy run a business from the school in the staff room for a while his son was basically going to class every so often and checking that his dad was okay. I mean, this is sort of interesting. I mean, the other one, of course, is to have a sort of a chill out room in the school. So, okay, our first leap is to get you away from home to school. Now, whether we get you to the classroom initially, just getting you to school is going to be a plus. So where would we put kids that aren't going to necessarily attend class? Then we need to think about who would you like to be greeted by when you come into the school. And most kids will have a particular person, usually one of their classmates. And you say, okay, well, I'm going to ask that classmate if they wouldn't mind coming and hanging out with you for a bit, which is kind of a nice job to give a kid, because they become a greeter, if you like, a greeter back into school. But we need to be patient, because of the heightened fear that's around, there is a lot of grief in the world. I mean, we should never forget that we've lost 7 million human beings to COVID, right? So there's a lot of grief in the world. And so this is why we're having this effect. It's not just out of the blue. It makes sense when you think about that vast number. And it doesn't mean necessarily that in every family there's been a direct loss, but it reverberates around in kids' consciousness. They are really aware of this. And probably the peak often is in that upper primary, early secondary or high school years too.
Wow. I'm going to skip over my final question and go for one that we've seen pop up a few times, which is from CRTs, but also for classroom teachers around setting their class up for CRTs when they don't have relationships and connections to the class, and any ways that we can either set our class up to make good choices while the teacher is absent, or for CRTs who are walking into a classroom that isn't theirs, a group that they're not connected to, and how they can encourage students to interact with them positively while they're there.
So the first thing, when students come into a classroom, whether it's a CRT or you, the first thing we want them to do is to get down to business. So we want to have up on the board or projected a question, a puzzle, an illusion, put these things in order. What do you think this means? That kind of stuff. So they walk in, they've got this question, have a go at figuring it out, and then turn to somebody next to you and tell them what you think the answer is. You've got your feet up, thinking about, life and having a good time. They're working. Great. Okay. And so basically then, because you want to get down to business, what that does, it's a challenge, and so it increases dopamine. And then, of course, because they're turning to somebody else and talking, they're breaking the social seal of silence and they're interacting with somebody, that increases serotonin. Then, of course, for a CRT person, you might have one or two of those, but you may also have then topics of conversation. So CRT people can sometimes do a lot of processing with a group. So in terms of having a couple of conversations about particular topics, which I think is really useful to do. I mean, clearly we can outline what we'd like them to cover, but at the same time, having a conversation with a group of kids about a topic that's related to whatever you're teaching can deepen their understanding and basically give you a different perspective on it. And then, of course, it's worth thinking about then how do we gain feedback from that CRT worker about how that went. And sometimes I think we miss that bit of it. And yet that can be really quite valuable. So having a different adult in the room can be a really an opportunity for them to broaden their social connection and confidence. Also to maybe discuss things without the expectations they perceive you as having of them. So some kids will sort of brighten up and be more interactive than they usually would. Others might quieten down. So that's interesting to know about. And then thinking about how you utilize that, not necessarily to impart a whole lot of new information, because they don't really trust that adult, but basically talking about in the third person about a topic. So it might be, for example, what would you say are the major things that are similar between summer and spring, and what's different about them, or something like that.
Wow. They are tips that I wish I had when I was in the classroom. I'm really aware that we're getting very close to the end of the session, but I am going to ask this one final question before we do our own reflection on things that we want to take away from today's session. So I'm just wondering, one of the things that in my classroom was a great pressure reliever was having some go-to activities, or sort of like a goodie bag of things to do with your class when things are feeling really heightened for me. And I've just read it in your book and I'm like, yes, I was onto something, the power of the whisper. That was my way of getting attention. I'm like, yes, I knew there was a reason that worked. I'm just wondering if there's any things that you have that are like go-tos that you think the teachers should have in their goodie bag of tricks, whether it's a game or an activity or even just the power of a whisper, that we can take away and trial the next time our class is feeling a little bit of pressure.
I always love that activity. I've probably nicked it from somewhere, so I apologize for not giving credit where credit's due. Everyone stand up and stretch for a moment. Now, I want you to take 9 paces away from where you are, big paces. On your way, I want you to say good morning to 3 people, or as you pass 3 people, tell them you are looking great, or whatever, something like that. And then when you get to the 9th pace, stop and await further instructions, right? And the reason why you do this sort of, some activity like saying good morning or you're looking great is to teach kids that it's okay to do that kind of stuff, the courtesy and manners, and that's kind of useful. Otherwise, you get kids to go 9 paces, 1, 2, 3. Right. Then they get to the 9th place and you go, okay, turn to the person next to you and ask them for an answer about this, or tell them something you know about that, and then return to your seats. And so moving kids around, of course, allows them to interact. And there are the odd kid, there are always a few kind of best friends forever who want to kind of walk together and you go, no, you're going that way, you're going that way. So you become a bit of a traffic controller. But at the same time, so you're diversifying, but you're teaching kids they can interact, think, and converse with people. So I think the things that we have become too focused on are getting through the curriculum at the expense of conversation and thinking.
I'm going to share one of mine.
Low connectedness in classrooms.
Yeah, I'm going to share one of mine, and it's not a get up and move activity, but it was something that I didn't learn until after quite a while that it was actually helpful for my classes. And that was when things were feeling really heightened and I was feeling really heightened, we'd take a pause and I would discuss the fact that I'm having a little bit of a challenge right now with feeling frustrated or with the behavior in the class. We'd talk about it, and then we'd reflect on the fact of that, but then we would sit down and everybody, including myself, would close our eyes and we'd press reset together, and our reset button was in the middle of our forehead. We'd take a deep breath, and that was a really quiet moment. And I didn't realize it was working until one day when I walked up to a boy who was already quite frustrated and he was going like this. And I asked him, what are you doing? And he said, I'm pressing reset. And I thought, okay, great. I didn't know that you were going to use this at other times, but at the same time, I'm really glad that this has become a signal to you of something I can do when I recognize that I'm feeling stressed. And if that is the thing that reminds you to take a breath, then I'm going to continue on with that. So for anyone online today, that's Kirsten's tip of the way to get your class to take a breath together. install a reset button in their forehead. I'm going to ask right now, Andrew, at the end of these sessions, we like to do 3 things that people online can take away, or that you want them to take away. I'm going to do 3. You're going to do 3. And if you're online and you'd like to share your 3 in the Q&A, and it might even be 3 things you're interested in learning about. It doesn't have to be 3 things you've learned today. It can be 3 things you've thought about off the back of this. We'd love to hear them, and we'd like to share ours. I'm going to start by sharing mine because I have learned just as much today as I'm hoping you've all learned. 3 things I want everyone here to take away today is that I think you're probably doing a better job than you think you are. Just like we have to be champions for the kids in our class, we also have to be champions for ourselves and for other educators as well. And we're not on the life raft alone. So I hope that at the end of today, you're thinking about things you can do to help your class connect, but also how you can apply things you've heard today to your own careers and to your life and to just teaching in general. Please reach out and make sure that you're using your teacher networks and your friend networks. Number 2 is I have next to me a copy of a book that I've been wanting to read since we set this workshop up, and it's Andrew's new book, Guerrilla Tactics for Teachers. And this is not a shameless plug. Naomi from Cool just brought it in to me before we started, and immediately I opened it up and started having a look. And I thought, geez, I wish I had this when I was in the classroom. But also I looked at some of the things and thought, I did that. And that made me feel really good about myself as an educator. It made me remember that even at the moments I thought I was failing, I probably wasn't. So I'm going to send everybody a link for that in the coming days. If you'd like to find out more about Andrew's book, it's there. Again, not a shameless plug, but I am going to read that tonight. And number 3 is that even in these conversations, there are going to be things that work for me, that work for Andrew, that work for you. They might be different, but please feel free to share them. We are learners as well. And the tips that you have that your teacher friends might say, oh, why is your class always appearing like they're on task? Or why can you get that student to listen and I can't? Share your tips, because that really helps other educators out, and it provides some consistency for kids as well. Andrew, your 3.
Well, just the fastest way to reduce anxiety is basically if you cross your arms and have your hands on the outside of your arms, and you take a deep breath, and then you sniff a bit more in, and then you do a slow exhale. And as you do it, you sort of tap in alternating fashion your arms. So you kind of look very cool and laconic, right? Your arm, not a care in the world, right? And just getting kids to do that once or twice makes an incredible difference just to their over physiological level of stress, and yours as well. So that's a really powerful thing to do. The second one would be really that we live in a time where we've sort of forgotten about the importance of humanity and the idea that really at the end of the day, the business that you're in is one of developing human beings, which is a fantastic career, right? And that means you're developing them as human beings, but you're also developing their brains. So I often say that, teachers are neuro-architects. They're actually growing brains. So the next time you're at a dinner party and someone says, what do you do for a living? I'd actually like you to turn to them and say, I'm in neuroarchitecture. What do you do? Real estate, that must be fascinating. And the third part is that these COVID years, it's been a bit like a funectomy for lots of people, really. The fun has just been sort of zapped out of life, And I think as a group of people, as a group of professionals, what we want to do is create schools that are fun to work in for us, if nothing else, right? And so bringing that joy back into it a bit is important. Now, I get there's all sorts of constraints and hardships and so on. I'm not for a moment pretending there's otherwise, but at the same time, unless we take charge of this a bit and go, no, look, we can do a whole lot of this stuff in in a more fun way, it all gets a bit serious and a bit dull. And then we wonder why the kids don't want to show up, really. Which is kind of surprising because we don't either. Much of the time. Kind of crazy.
And yeah, no, and sometimes it's really hard to lean into the fun when you're feeling a bit stressed. So I know I have a challenge with that even as an adult. So that's a really good reminder. And I'm really glad that this is recorded because I'm going to go back and listen to those tips later. We are nearing the end of our session. So in wrapping up, I could actually speak about this for hours. Unfortunately, we don't have hours, but what we do have is we've created 6 PL sessions with Andrew that are live on cool.org. They're for Cool Plus members. And this video will be recorded and put there as well for later viewing. I will shamelessly say that I have been trawling through those PLs from the moment that they got up, because like I said, at the start of my career, some of my first PL sessions were with Andrew, and this one hasn't failed to make me feel even more enthusiastic about learning about the brain, learning about teaching strategies, learning about relationship building. So if you're interested in any of those, you'll be receiving some links from me in the coming days. Please go and check them out. There'll be links to there to cool.org, to Cool Plus as well. There'll also be a link to Guerrilla Tactics for Teachers. You can't see this very well with the background, and I am really aware of that the background was distracting, so thank you for putting up with that today. There'll be a link there for you to go and check out Andrew's book as well. And as you exit this webinar, there will be a short, and it is very short, there's a lot of yes, no ranking type questions, but there's also some spaces for you to fill in a survey of things that you'd like cool.org to do in the future, perhaps with Andrew, perhaps burning questions that you've got about relationship building or about the brain or about the chemicals in the brain. I'm about to probably go and read a whole lot about dopamine and cortisol. And please feel free to drop that information in as well. I'd really like to thank everybody for joining us today and taking time out of your day to come and learn with us at cool.org. Andrew, I'd like to thank you for joining us as well. And I'm also going to give you one final minute to leave us with any final thoughts that you'd like us to walk away with on Tuesday night in what's my time, 5:14 p.m.
So ultimately, your students are going to learn more about you than they learn about anything you teach them. So living your own life well is such a critical thing. And I know it's easy. It takes really, really careful planning as a teacher to have a good time. It's much easier to have a stressed out, miserable time. So we need to really, and that's part of why I wrote Guerrilla Tactics for Teachers, to try to really think about how do we plan to have a good time? Because if the teachers are just exhausted and kind of overwhelmed and saying, this is really exciting, we need to learn it because it's going to be a rush to get through, goodness me. So we actually have to look after ourselves because we know nothing works without that bit.
Thank you again, Andrew. Thank you to everyone for joining us. I am Kirsten from Cool. We've been with Andrew Fuller today. Thanks for Mike and Marnie, and to Mike and Marnie, and to Marie, who's just hopped offline. Please feel free to reach out to my email address, which is kirsten.y@cool.org, if you've got any questions about today's session, or about Cool Plus, or about cool.org in general. And we have another workshop coming up very, very soon. I believe we're going to have one with Dr. Zali Yeager from the Embrace Collective. So stay tuned for information coming out about that. Until then, stay cool and speak to you soon.
Thank you so much, everyone.